StraighTallDay.com.
You're now tuned in to the show where you learn the discipline to show up day after day, to do the work, the confidence to put yourself out there boldly and authentically, and the mental toughness to continue showing up, doing the work, putting yourself out there, even when the success you've expected to achieve has yet to be achieved. And on top of all this, you get a huge dose of personal initiative. That is the go-getter energy that moves any one of us, including yourself, to go and make things happen instead of waiting for things to happen. And then we put all this together into a series of frameworks, approaches, insights, strategies, and techniques all underneath the umbrella of one unifying philosophy that is called Work on Your Game. My name is Dre Baldwin, also known as Dre All Day, and welcome to the show. And today's topic is how and why people use logical fallacies. Now, this is a topic that is fun for me. I like talking about this topic a lot because let me explain it this way. I talked about this, first of all, if y'all didn't hear me talk about logical fallacies, it was not that long ago. Back in episode number 3110, I did a 4-part series starting with that episode about the most common logical fallacies. And actually, episode 3110 was kind of a while ago. Man, I record a lot of content. So anyway, when I did that episode, I was breaking down logical fallacies and how people tend to use them. Those of you not familiar with the concept of a logical fallacy, let me see if I can get ChatGPT to give me a nice little description of logical fallacies. And I'll just read off what they say here so y'all understand it for those who didn't hear that episode, which was 100 episodes ago. So, well, it's kind of a while. So a logical fallacy, according to ChatGPT, is an error in reasoning that weakens an argument. It happens when someone uses faulty logic, misleading reasoning, or emotional manipulation instead of solid evidence. Logical fallacies can make arguments seem convincing, but they don't actually prove anything. So I'm going to challenge ChatGPT a little bit on this description, because logical fallacies do prove things to people who already believe whatever the speaker of the logical fallacy is saying, but they don't prove anything to the people who are not already in accordance with the perspective of the deliverer of the logical fallacy. And I'm a person who is extremely logical. My friend Charlene likes to call me annoyingly logical, and I wear that title. I'll accept that title because I tend to look at things very logically, and I try to be as objective as a human being can be, even though no human can be completely objective. That's pretty much impossible. I have often noticed, before I even knew what a logical fallacy was, I've often had the ability to notice when people build their cases based on what is often a whole bunch of nonsense, often building on faulty logic. In other words, they don't really know how to formulate an argument. Misleading reasoning, so they come up with reasons that don't quite match the conclusion that they're trying to get to, and or most often emotional manipulation. So I've had to break these three down into a pie of 100%. Emotional manipulation is about 60%. Then a 20% to misleading reasoning, and 20% to faulty logic. And really, emotional manipulation usually leads to misleading reasoning and faulty logic. So it's usually because people's arguments are much more emotional than they are logical. And the reason for that is because most people are simply not logical. I told you 3 truths about human beings. People don't think, they don't read, and they're lazy. And those 3 things lead to a lack of logic, because logic takes thinking, reading, and effort. So when I talked about the most common logical fallacies people use, I was just breaking down what they are, how they are, and where they come from, so you can get better at spotting them. One of the keys of dealing with people who are using logical fallacies against you is you must be able to catch them, and not them, the person, but the logical fallacy itself, and call people out on their bullshit before they use it against you. Because if you don't notice someone using a logical fallacy against you, you are likely to fall victim to the fallacy and end up in a conversation that has nothing to do with where you were trying to go, simply because that person was able to artfully and successfully use the fallacy against you. The reason why this is such an important topic, reason I did a 4-part series on it before, and I'm doing a 2-part series on it starting today, is because these are so common in human discourse, because most people build their arguments usually containing some form of logical fallacy, because again, logic requires thinking, reading, and effort. And most human beings do not want to engage in all 3 of those, at least not consistently. So what I'm going to explain here today is how and why these things happen. As I already told you, I broke down what they are. Should have did this one first, but that's okay. You can listen to them out of order. And often people are using these unbeknownst to themselves. They don't even know that they're doing it until you start pointing it out. And I've got really good at pointing it out, especially since I am often on social media, and I do live streams, as I told you all, Monday through Friday, 8 a.m. Eastern. And often on those live streams, I talk about current events. And on the subject of current events, one of the reasons why I like talking about it is because it draws a significant amount of attention. And the reason it draws attention is because on current events, usually everyone has conflicting opinions. So there's some people who are happy about this, some people are mad about this, some people look this way, some people look at it that way. So when I go and give my, again, in my perspective, logical and objective breakdown of the situation and how it's happening, of course, there are going to be people there who disagree with me, and they often in the comments will use logical fallacies to combat my perspective. So I get a whole lot of practice in pointing out people's bullshit and their logical fallacies through doing this, which partly planted the seed or germinated the seed for what I'm going to talk about here today. So what I'm going to do is break down why this happens, so that you can get better at understanding where others may be coming from when they use logical fallacies against you. And also so you can catch yourself, because many human beings, not all of you, but actually all human beings are susceptible to using logical fallacies, but some more than others in certain circumstances. So let's get to it. Point number one. Today's topic, once again, is how and why people use logical fallacies. Again, it's going to be a two-part series. Number one, a person hears something with which they disagree. So again, everything I'm going to say here in this series, you should listen out for this when you're having conversations with others, so you may know what may trigger their logical fallacies, and catch yourself on this. Check yourself on this, because when you hear something that you disagree with, you may be prone to using a logical fallacy to combat that thing that you just heard. So the usual triggering of a logical fallacy is usually some type of mental disturbance that a person goes through. And a mental disturbance does not mean there's something wrong with their brain or that they're not developed. That's not what I mean. I just mean they're disturbed in a way that mentally they just don't like what they just heard. I'll give you an example. Once I was out at a pizza shop with 3 other people. So it was me and a female, and then there was another man and a female. And the other guy's female was sitting across from me at the table. And we were talking about something. She was saying something about, I guess she was into like saving the environment and doing things for the environment. And I made some kind of comment about what she was saying. I can't remember what the topic was, but let's just say, to fill in the blank, because that's not even the point. It was something, let's say she was talking about recycling, right? And I said, I don't really recycle that often. And because she was saying that recycling helps the environment. I said, I don't really recycle. And she said, why? And I said with a smile on my face, I said, because I don't give a fuck about the environment. And everybody else at the table started laughing because it was obviously a joke. And I was saying it in a tongue-in-cheek type of way, but she clearly doesn't like people making these kind of jokes. So as soon as I said it, and I immediately followed it up after I laughed for a second, I followed it up by saying, I'm joking. But in between me saying it and saying that I'm joking, her face changed. Like, there, you know how they had these things called micro expressions? And the micro expression on her face immediately changed to where she was really not happy with what I said. And she got this flash of scorn, looking directly at me. This flash of scorn went across her face as soon as I said that. And I'm telling you that to explain to you this. That's an example of when I say mental disturbance, that's what I mean. She mentally really did not like what I said. And the thing is, the face gives everything away, because the face is directly connected to the brain. Well, not connected, but it's very close to the brain. Your face and your brain are very close to each other. So any message that the brain is sending out, the face registers it first, and then it goes everywhere else. So it gets to the feet and the legs and the hands later, because it has to travel, literally geographically travel from your, anatomically better to say it, from your brain to your externality. It takes a longer time for a message to get from your brain to your legs. It takes no time at all to get from your brain to your face. So if you watch another person's face, you can tell they're giving away a lot of what they are feeling or thinking in certain situations, which is why all of you are familiar with the concept of the poker face. It's the person who doesn't give away what they're thinking or feeling, or at least they're not supposed to, because they're trying to keep in inscrutable facial situation, for lack of a better term. So someone simply hearing something that they disagree with, and your ears are right next to your brain, think about it anatomically, and what happens is people will find themselves reacting rather than responding when this occurs, if something really, really bothers them. Now, if I hear something that I disagree with, for example, if somebody foolishly says something like LeBron James is a better basketball player than Michael Jordan, I do not agree with that, but I'm not disturbed by it. So I'm not going to really give a reaction. I'll say, okay, I understand that argument that person's making, but I'm not going to get reactive because I'm not emotionally engaged in the topic. I have an opinion, but I'm not engaged such that I'm disturbed by the fact that you said it. As I said, the example of my friend there, when I said, I don't give a damn about the environment, it was immediate reaction. And I've had many conversations in the vicinity of this woman. I never saw her react like that to anything else. So it's just an interesting thing. So when someone gets to reacting rather than responding, that's where they're disturbed. Right? They hear something that they really don't like. So for example, if you're a strong believer in one side of the political conversation and you hear someone offer an opinion that opposes your strong opinion, you may go straight into a reactive mode because mentally you are engaged in that conversation and you are mentally or emotionally engaged and you are disturbed by the fact that someone would say something other than what you believe. This is the reason why I mentioned that I do these live streams and I talk about current events. So often the current event that I'm talking about is something about the current presidential administration. For those of you who are listening to this sometime in the future, I'm recording this episode in the spring of 2025, and our current president is Donald Trump. And no matter when you're listening to this, it could be 2035 or 2055. You probably know through what you've learned through history, who knows who's telling it by the time you hear this, that Donald Trump was a very polarizing figure. A lot of people everybody had an opinion on him, and there was very little neutral on this guy. Everyone was very strongly on one side or another when it came to this individual. So when I talk about anything that involves him, there's a lot of strong reactions, not responses, but reactions. And because there are so many reactions and half of them roughly are going to be negative, I get really good at noticing and pointing out logical fallacies. Do you understand? That's what I'm explaining here. So when someone hears something that they really, really don't like, that's when you get the reaction. And a response, again, could be someone simply asking questions. So again, if you were to foolishly tell me that LeBron James is better than Michael Jordan, I might start asking you some questions, but I'm not going to get, there's no reaction going to come over my face. If any reaction, I'll probably smile because I understand. I mean, I like LeBron James. I think he's a very good player. I just think Jordan's better. Anyway, I would get curious. Maybe I would ask questions, or maybe I say nothing at all, depending on the context. So a reaction, on the other hand, would be somebody starting to become accusatory in terms of their questions, or to look for something that can be used to argue against the other person's position, whether it is logical or not. Often, again, as I already explained to you, most human beings are not logical. So often it will be not logical. So when I'm doing my live streams and I mention a current event, I get these all the time. So as I just explained to you, this is the reason why I've gotten good at it, because I had real life experience. So in these kind of conversations, especially when you have a lot of comments coming in all at the same time, you're trying to, not at the same time, but rapid fire, you got to get good at, first of all, reading them, saying them out loud, then responding to them, then getting to the next one. So it's, you get thrown into the fire, you get good at this stuff. And I've been doing this for a while. So you see a good amount of sarcasm, you see a lot of straw man arguments, you see a lot of false frames, you get a whole lot of false binaries, you get a whole lot of ad hominem meaning to the person rather than to the point. So people attacking me because they don't like what I said. Almost every day I get somebody in my live stream saying, well, just because you put on a suit and you have a bookshelf behind you with books doesn't make you smart. Almost every day somebody says that to me. That's a form of the ad hominem. So you're attacking me because you don't like what I'm saying. But anyway, I am still smart, but they're right. Actually, putting on a suit and having a bookshelf behind you does not make you smart. What makes you smart is what actually comes out of your mouth. Point number 2, today's topic, once again, is how and why people use logical fallacies. Number 2, most people's knee-jerk reactions to things that they disagree with are often based in their emotions, not their logic or rational thinking. And if you think about this, this makes perfect sense because our emotions are usually our reaction. And emotion doesn't necessarily mean we do anything, but you feel something immediately emotional when you're reacting. When you're responding logically or rationally, there is a space in between the stimulus and the response. That's what makes a response is that there's a space. When you take the space away between the stimulus and what you do, that's called a reaction. When there's a space, there's a response. So when someone's being logical, usually almost all the time, they're responding to what you said, not reacting to what you said. Emotions are reactive, logic is responsive. But most people don't want to admit that something has triggered them emotionally. When I say most people, usually I find men don't like to admit this. Women don't usually have a problem admitting it, but it depends. Again, case by case basis. There are people in both groups from both sides. So what happens is when a human being hears something that triggers them emotionally, that they really don't like on an emotional level, they don't want to admit, hey, you hurt my feelings, or I'm emotionally disturbed by what you said. Rarely do you hear people say stuff like that. Someone may admit that you hurt their feelings, but only if they have a intimate type of close enough a relationship to you to where they can be emotionally vulnerable. Most people won't just say that to some random person. All right, someone leaves a bad comment on your Instagram photo. You're not going to respond to the comment by saying, hey, you hurt my feelings, to some random weirdo with screen name, shy guy 2752. You're not going to respond to that person by saying that. So what happens is when we are emotionally triggered by something, we need a logical frame to put around it so that we don't admit that we are emotionally bothered by what happened. So when people put this logical frame around their emotional feelings, they have to come up with a rational explanation for what is ultimately an emotional position. Everybody hear what I just said? Let me say that one more time. People need to come up with a rational explanation for what is ultimately an emotional position. Now, this works on most people. Now, when someone tries to use this on you, it may work on you, depending on who you are and your experience in these type of conversations. Because as I already explained, most people are not good at recognizing logical fallacies, let alone are they good at pointing them out, explaining what they are, and telling the person who used it on them, hey, that's some bullshit what you just did, and therefore I'm not going to respond to what you said because you're using a fallacy to even set me up here. And again, how many people have you ever heard talk like that? All right, so I would bet for many of you, I may be the second, and for most of you, I'm probably the first. All right, so what happens is when you can't point out a logical fallacy, but it gets used on you, you end up going down the rabbit hole and engaging with this other person on something that you should have never engaged with in the first place. So now you're going in the wrong direction for a conversation that you weren't even supposed to be having because the person shifted the frame on you and you didn't notice that they shifted the frame. This is the reason why logical fallacies are so useful, because it's very easy to get people off of their square when you use this fallacy. I'll give you an example that many of you are familiar with if you follow politics at all, even on the surface level. In 2024, there was one presidential debate between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris. Now, Trump did two debates. He did one against Joe Biden, if you want to call that a debate. That was the death knell to Joe Biden's career, as a matter of fact. That one didn't go too well for Biden. He gets kicked out of his own spot, and they put Kamala in, and then Trump and Kamala have a debate. And if you remember, very early in that debate, Kamala Harris was able to use a logical fallacy on Donald Trump, and it worked. And the fallacy was this. She said the question had nothing to do with Donald Trump at all. The question was to Kamala, and it was about Kamala. I don't even remember what the question was, and that's the point, because what got remembered about it is what she said and then how he responded. What Kamala said is, look at Donald Trump's rallies. Nobody comes to his rallies. People leave his rallies. He doesn't have anybody coming to his audience. Nobody's in his audience. He doesn't have any energy. Nobody cares about his audience. I mean, nobody cares about his campaign. He doesn't have a whole lot of fans. Basically, I'm paraphrasing everything she said, but basically she was kind of pinpricking at Donald Trump's ego by saying he doesn't have a lot of people who come to the rallies to support him during his campaign. That's what she said. The question had nothing to do with any of this, but she said that anyway. And Donald Trump, when it was his turn to speak, he got asked a question that had nothing to do with what Kamala had said about his rallies, but Donald Trump could not resist the bait, and he took the bait. He fell for the logical fallacy. And the logical fallacy was really about pricking his ego and saying that he doesn't have a lot of people who come to his rallies. And it was basically a changing the subject. It was in logical fallacies. There's a couple of them you could label with this one. We call it moving the goalposts, because Kamala got asked a question about, I don't remember what it was about. Let's say it was about immigration or something like that. And she answered the question talking about Donald Trump's rallies. So she moved the goalposts, and which was what Donald Trump should have done is said, well, what my opponent just did was she didn't answer the question about that thing because she looks terrible on it, and here's her record on it. He should have pointed that out. And then she tried to shift the conversation to something that has nothing to do with what we're talking about right here. Nice try, Kamala, but let's talk about the real problem that she has, which is XYZ. And he could have just hammered her on some solid points. But Donald Trump's a human being, just like you, just like me, just like Kamala. And because he's a human being, he fell for the bait of the logical fallacy. And what he started doing was defending how many people come to his rallies. And you could see the look on Kamala's face while he started defending a point that he never should have even addressed. She had this big smile on her face because it had worked. I guarantee you her team had prepped her before the rally. Hey, use this on him, use this. And she used it, and it actually fucking worked. Luckily for Donald Trump, he recovered and he still won the election. But that's an example. You can go find that clip on social media, probably very easy, where he very much fell hook, line, and sinker for a logical fallacy. And all of you have fallen hook, line, and sinker for logical fallacies like that before. Often the easiest one to get a person to fall for, especially a person with a big ego, is anything that basically challenges the thing that their ego may stand on. So if you can figure out what that is and you challenge it, then it's very easy to catch people with that. But you got to be careful, because if you try it and it fails and they call it out, now what are you going to do? You better have a plan B. So when someone tries to use, for example, a logical fallacy on me, the first thing I do is point out the logical fallacy. I point out, all right, that's a fallacy. That's a red herring. That's a straw man. That's ad hominem. Again, I told you how I got good at noticing these, because I'm on the internet a lot, and you get this all day on the internet. And then I explain to them why I'm not going to address what they've actually said, because they use the fallacy to come up with it. And when the false frame is there around the topic, then this topic is not even addressable. We got to address the actual topic. And generally, if any of you can get good at this, I'll tell you, it stops people in their tracks, because usually they don't have a response to this, because most people don't have much of an understanding of a logical fallacy. But when you hear the term, you kind of get it. And if you're unaware, you end up engaging, which is what you shouldn't do. Again, Donald Trump fell for this, and you end up going down a path that you never should have entered in the first place. Actually, the saving grace for Donald Trump in that debate was that they had moderators who had to change the subject and go to a different topic. Because I feel had there been no moderators, you just had Kamala and Trump talking, Trump would have talked the entire time about his debates, his crowd, not debate, but his rally crowd sizes, because it obviously touched his ego. So Kamala, one credit I will give to Kamala and her team was that they were prepared for that one, and it worked. Point number 3. Today's topic, once again, is why people use logical fallacies. Point number 3. Logical fallacies occur when someone is using, as I said, an illogical explanation for their position. So let me give you an example. People are trying to explain why they believe what they believe, but they don't even know how to explain it. This often happens because people don't formulate their own opinions based on their own thinking. They get their opinions from other people, and then when they have to explain their positions, they don't really have a way of explaining it, so they come up with a logical fallacy to make themselves sound like they think for themselves when they really don't. Most people, I just told you, they don't think, they don't read, and they're lazy. So this is the reason why people often do this. So for example, there are black people out there who will say something to me. If I happen to say something that goes against the grain of what black people are quote unquote supposed to believe and agree with, they'll say, Dre, you must hate black people. I've had people say that to me. Dre, you must hate black people because you have this negative opinion about the Democratic Party or about Black Lives Matter, or you're not a fan of DEI, so you must hate black people, or any other thing that black people have been indoctrinated into believing they have to go with to represent their quote unquote blackness. Now, this is obviously an emotional position that this person is taking, and they have been groomed into, because there are many people out there who seriously believe this. They're not joking when they say it. They really believe it. And they are incapable of thinking logically about their position because they don't even see it as, they don't even see a possibility that there could be another way of looking at things. And in my experience, people who are deeply invested in an emotional belief have very little interest in hearing anyone talk about the topic in a logical way. They don't want to hear it. Why? Because you can't out-logic someone from their emotions. All right, logic takes a lot more mental energy than emotion does. Emotion takes emotional energy, but it doesn't take mental energy. It actually takes no mental energy at all. No one wants to hear logic when they're emotional. So they really don't want to hear someone like me talking logically about a topic that they are emotionally engaged in, especially if we're disagreeing. Now, if I'm talking logically and you agree with me, you still don't want to hear it, but at least you like the conclusion that I'm coming to. If you want to see an example of this, again, all the men who are listening to this, think about the last time you were in an argument with a female. All right, that is an example of you trying to use logic and her being in an emotional state, and I don't even have to ask you how that argument went. And if you're a female, just flip it around. How did it feel the last time you were in an emotional state and you are arguing with a man and he tried to out-logic you out of your position? Right? I don't have to ask you how that went either. All that said, let's recap today's class, which is how and why people use logical fallacies. Again, it's going to be a 2-part series. Number 1, the person hears something with which they disagree. So basically, you triggered them mentally by saying something that a person doesn't like. And often people, again, if they really don't like it, they get reactive rather than responsive. Number 2, most people's knee-jerk reactions to things they disagree with are often based in their emotions, not in their logic or rational thinking. I hear things that I disagree with all the time, but I don't get reactive most of the time because, again, I know how to put space in between the stimulus and my response. It becomes a response when you put a space there. It's a reaction when there's no space. And number 3, logical fallacies occur when someone uses an illogical explanation for a position that they never logically came to in the first place. So these people, many people, come to positions of beliefs in life that they never actually examined. They got those beliefs usually from their environment or whoever raised them, and they never examined if they actually believe, why they believe what they believe. And then when you ask them why they believe it, they try to come up with a logical explanation, but they use a lot of fallacies in doing so because they never thought about it in the first place. That's how you end up sticking yourself. Again, depending on who you're talking to, you might get called out on this, but most of the time, honestly, you don't get called out because most people cannot recognize a logical fallacy. They cannot recognize flawed logical arguments. So hopefully some of you now have the skill because I'm pointing it out, and I'm not done. Tomorrow we're going to get into part 2. So between now and then, workonyourgameuniversity.com to have me as your direct coach, get access to all of our trainings and courses, and I'll see you next episode. Work on your game. Dre, all